everyone, welcome to this week's Health by Ratio vlog. We're going to be talking about knee injuries this week and in the coming weeks on how to rehabilitate from significant knee injuries, prevent future ones, as well as optimizing your movement patterns in your jumping, changing directions, sprinting, basically any major athletic feat that you need to go through. So why are we covering this topic? Well, this topic of knee injuries is a crazy epidemic right now. I would say that a majority of the people that we work with through Health by Ratio are dealing with some type of knee injury, whether a massive surgery or just trying to deal with some chronic tendonitis. Some of the most common injuries that we see and work with are ACL injuries, LCL injuries, MCL injuries, meniscus injuries. PCL, the back of the knee, happens here and there. Mostly that's because of a leg being planted and someone hitting, or a funky issue with regards to planting into a pothole or something like that. But for the most part, it's the ACL, MCL, LCL, along with patella tendonitis, knee dislocations, fractures, the full gambit. And the reason why this happens is because if we look to Stanford Health, they basically say most of our knee injuries occur, very simply put, the foot's planted in one direction and the knee moves in another direction that it wasn't intended, hence why we have these issues. Well, over 50% of knee injuries right now are occurring in non-contact forms, meaning no one touches us. So we are having that issue with the foot being planted in one direction and the knee going in another direction, causing the injury without anyone influencing us. That means there's an imbalance going on in the body. And we've seen it with our own clients left and right, but one of our best examples, I should say, of this over the last couple of years was Claire, who ended up being recruited and offered to play volleyball for Princeton. And before she was playing for Princeton as a senior in high school, she came to us where she was having chronic knee pain. It was affecting her jumping ability. She wasn't able to explode and get to the balls that she wanted when she was blocking. She wasn't able to get as much force when she was jumping up for her spikes or jump serves, and she wasn't able to track down the balls as quick as she wanted to because she was having these issues with her knee. So we ended up doing an analysis on her, a functional analysis, to figure out what was going on in her body, and we saw that she was having the issue that's so incredibly common of knee valgus, meaning the knees were collapsing inward whenever she was doing lower body movement. So if she was jumping or squatting, her knees were caving in, and for her, her feet were turning out a little bit. If she was lunging to change direction, for instance, or taking a step into a jump, her knee was caving in relative to that foot. That's what knee valgus is called. And for females, knee valgus is way, way, way more common than males, but it happens regularly in males as well. But it's about 70% more ACL injuries, for instance, that are mainly tied toward that knee valgus issue, are 70% more likely to occur in females than males. And that's because of the natural anatomy of having broader hips. The knee valgus often stems from an imbalance in the ankles and imbalance in the hips. And the imbalance in the hips with a wider natural hip base, the glute medius, which is the muscle that's lacking in its recruitment when knee valgus occurs, has to compensate a heck of a lot more in females versus males who have much narrower waists. So we have, and like I said, this is something that still does happen in males. We're actually going to go over an example in a second with Robert Griffin III, who is a very high-profile quarterback who got drafted second overall into the NFL a couple of years ago and was injury-ridden with all kinds of knee and ankle problems, and you're going to see exactly an example of where this showed up in a minute. But going back to Claire, these issues of knee valgus, these angles inward cause shearing onto things like the meniscus. They cause some slack and tension to occur where you get slack into the ACL and then it snaps taut very quickly, and that wears and tears on the ACL. It causes the patella tendon to go off of track. So all of these, and obviously the more and more of these aggravations occur, the more likely you're to see fractures and or dislocations. So knee valgus is associated with so many knee injuries. And we're going to be going over how to correct it, because as we corrected it with Claire, not only was she able to get more explosive, but she was able to stay healthy for her entire senior season, and then she was able to finish that off with getting multiple college offers and finally signing with Princeton. And before she came to us, she thought that she had major ACL, MCL, meniscus injuries, where she actually got under the knife, went into surgery. They opened her up to see there wasn't that much damage. It was just chronic micro traumas that were causing her pains. But because they opened her up, she had to go through all kinds of rehabilitation from that injury that took her weeks out of her training in the off season. And so by the time she got to us, her mom and herself were super frustrated they didn't understand what was going on with the knee. They didn't know how to correct it. So needless to say, when we found out that it was in part due to her knee valgus, other issues were going on in her thoracic spine and her shoulder girdle as well. But when we were able to correct that, they were over the moon in terms of how she was able to perform, improve, not only her parents, but also her high school coaches and obviously the coaches that recruited her. So we are going to take a look at the ankles and the hips when it comes to knee injuries. This is due to Gray Cook, who is a functional physical therapist. He's also kind of known as the godfather of functional exercise. He literally wrote the book called Movement. We're going to cite one of his articles where he is talking about knee pain and saying that the knees themselves are a single plane joint. They're designed to bend forward and backwards. And so if they're moving inward or outward too much and we're causing shearing and microtraumas in and around all of those connective tissues, then we got to look at something that's going on above and below that might be causing the knee to have to compensate. So let's look at a perfect example of Robert Griffin III right now, where I'm going to pull up an image right here, and you guys can see this is a combine shot of him right before he got drafted in the NFL going into his high jump. And you can see from left to right, he starts off with loading down into the jump. And as we get into photo 2, you start to see the knees start to collapse down a little bit, specifically the left one. Then you get into photos 3 and 4, you see him really caving in. His knees are almost touching on photos 4 and 5. And then that's causing his shoulders to cave forward. His ankles are collapsing. And then he's finally straightening out as he's exploding on the upward phase and almost at his peak. So you can see examples here of what knee valgus looks like. And there are a number of varieties of how this looks. So like I said, you could have your knees basically pointed straight ahead, but the feet pointed out. That is considered knee valgus because it's relative to the feet themselves. And then you can obviously see it with regards to Robert Griffin III's, where his ankles, even though they collapse a little bit, his feet are basically pointed straight ahead. There's a little bit of deviations in them, but not significant. It's all stemming from the knees themselves. So we're having issues with ankle mobility and we're having issues with hip strength there. That was what Claire was having an issue with. So in the coming weeks, what we're really going to be going over is how you can self-analyze and self-correct what's going on in the ankle to see if you have any mobility or stability issues in the ankle. Then we're going to go into how, if you have any mobility or stability issues into the hips themselves, and how you can correct any imbalances that might be going on in the quads and the hamstrings. An example of something that you guys are probably really familiar with, for those of you that are trying to recover from knee injuries or have had them in the past, is clamshells. I'm pretty sure that everybody, whether it's a high school athlete or whether it's a weekend warrior that's dealt with knee injuries, has done clamshells. You can do this either body weight or you can do it with a resistance band wrapped around you, but you're essentially laying on your side and coming up and opening up and pushing your knees apart at the top of this. That is considered a glute medius exercise, and that's the area that we are primarily targeting to strengthen in the hips with our clients. It's just the challenge with a clamshell is that it doesn't really retrain the central nervous system how to recruit that muscle while you are actually doing any athletic movement pattern. So if you want the glute medius to fire while you're jumping or while you're cutting, and you want it to be more practical and functional in the athletic movements that you're doing, you gotta train that glute medius to fire in those functional circumstances so that it applies directly to what you're doing, as opposed to doing it in isolation in a movement where you're laying on your side that doesn't necessarily translate to how you are performing in your sport. So these next couple of videos, guys, now that you understand really what we're looking for that pertain to knee injuries, we're going to be going into practically how to correct them, working our way below and above that knee so that we can rehabilitate, that we can prevent, and potentially we can make ourselves even more explosive like Claire did, where she's jumping higher, several inches increased in her vertical, or getting more explosive and quicker to get to those balls that you need, or track down that defender, whatever you're trying to do. You can recruit yourself so much better because your body is moving in a much more efficient way, and all the force that you're driving into the ground is moving you in the direction you want, as opposed to it being offset and collapsing and basically having wasted force production. So that'll be what's coming up, guys. Hope you enjoyed this explanation of knee injuries and what to look for yourself. We'll get in much more detail in the coming weeks.